Legal disclaimer time. The opinions shared on Priority Air are those of Rob Fair, Chris Voller, and whoever we conned into speaking with us this week. To be clear, they don't necessarily represent those of any organization you may associate with us, but they do represent honest conversation, a bit of humor, and a lot of heart. Enjoy the episode, you guys. Thanks for listening.
Hello, everybody. Today we got Seb Lavoie joining us, and normally we have a specific topic, but today we don't. We're just going to have a chat, see where it leads us, and I'm sure it'll be entertaining and enjoyable, and maybe we'll learn some wise things from the brilliant author. I can say author now. And writer and ex-ERT member and ex-SM and a lot of things, and now the holder of a giant beard. So welcome, Seb, and looking forward to chatting.
Well, thanks for having me. And if it doesn't go anywhere, nobody will know any better because we can just ditch it.
That's right. And for those who just listen, the beard is fabulous. You probably want to go to YouTube and watch the video.
No, you don't.
It's substantial. So yeah, thanks. And first off, why don't you just tell people a little bit about yourself, like where you're from, background, whatever, and then we can get into wherever we go.
Yeah, for sure. Right now, I'm sort of having this conversation from Cardston, southern Alberta, on the border with Montana. I spent 20 years on the force for, what was that, 2001 to 2021. Retired at 364 days, or 364 days with a lump sum, and create a company called Raven Strategic. Did all kinds of stuff in between then and there, all kinds of mishaps and all kinds of good things. Yeah, I'm living on the farm now from the city my entire life. So quite the change.
No doubt. So first question is, did your love of granola come from your time on the island? Because I think you're from Montreal, but your first posting was Tofino, I believe. So was that where the love of granola and eventually what led to farming?
I wish I could say that, but it wasn't that kind of crowd in Tofino, unfortunately. But interestingly enough, when I was a teenager, I worked on a farm. So there isn't very many where I was from, but some areas had farms, and I ended up on a farm. Not very long. I wasn't doing it every summer or anything like that, but I was. I really took to that. And I think a few things. A, the physicality of it. And then the fact that it also sort of gave me time to introspect and just kind of sit with myself, for extended periods of times while I was stacking or doing whatever it is I was doing. And so there was a certain therapeutic value to it. And there certainly was a certain connection with nature that probably was initiated there. That was a catalyst for it. And then that's stuck with me my entire service. I mean, it was a massive sort of offloading mechanism for me through my entire service to go out in the woods, to do hikes. And Rob, better than anybody else, because you and I have spent a great deal of time in the woods and hiking and doing things, not always super fun, but mostly fun. And yeah, I think that it intersected at the end of my service when I one day realized that I was spending 2-3 hours a day in the woods, hiking and doing mental health walk and doing all the things every day. But I lived in the city. Mm-hmm. So I'm a bit slow. So it took me a little bit longer to realize that maybe I should live in the woods and visit the city from time to time when I feel like it, and Bob's your uncle. Mm-hmm. A year or two later with the right partner, and that had a similar vision. And she was, my wife Alex was riding horses. She was competing with horses, and she wanted horses back the rest of her, adult life, really, because I think her last horse was boarded in BC somewhere and passed away a couple of years ago. And so she didn't have a prospect in sight as to when that was going to happen. But I came along and puzzled the pieces fit as they may. And here we are.
There you go. A lot of people found it interesting. So I've known you obviously for a long time, back to, I don't know what year, 2000 in single digits for sure. We were actually at Depot at the same time. I think you were in the French troop. I was in troop, which was 27. I think I was troop 20.
Wait, I'm French?
Yeah. Well, they thought about putting me in there. I had taken one class in Duolingo, and uh, I did pretty well, but I
That's pretty
ended up.
much what they did with my English.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of people were that knew you sort of peripherally, didn't really know you, but knew of you through whether it was through workouts or whatever it was through the SM world. Uh, sort of knew you were from Montreal, lived in the Lower Mainland most of your life. You had other posting, but um, and then all of a sudden, the messages I was receiving is, "Hold on, Seb's a farmer now." Uh, what? Sorry, what did he? Did I hear right that he's out bought a farm and not bought the farm in the colloquial term, but like actually purchased a farm? And there was a lot of uh, surprise and some actual like shock. Like what happened here? So as it relates to other members, and you mentioned some stuff there that I think probably is relatable to a lot of people, a lot of members, where you need that little bit of an escape, whatever. And so you did a fairly drastic one, which was you just left. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like the decision to leave. Like so you're finished with as an SM and now you're considering becoming, I believe, like a full TL on the ERT team or going back as a staff or something of that nature, going back as still a sergeant major, but a staff. And then, sort of next thing anybody knows, you're out. So can you talk about like how did that happen and like what was the thought process that led to that?
Man, that's a massive rabbit hole, but I'll try to keep it. I'll try to keep it reasonable. So first and foremost, I'll disclaim some of the myths out there. I had a great career. I have no qualms with my career. I had a great career. I love my time in the force. I love the people I work with. Um, Mostly the leaders I worked under. Yes, I just like anybody else, I dealt with leaders that needed work, but I'm actually grateful for them too because they made me better, and my own mistakes made me better, and all of the things. So I really have nothing to say about my career other than it was absolutely epic. But life is epic. And exploring is epic. And I don't want to be held hostage to anything. I don't want to look in the mirror and be like, well, I'm not really feeling it, but I'm getting a steady paycheck. Like I know the appeal of that, but the appeal does not supersede the value of not doing that. And so those things have to be taken into balance. And for me, I had to look at what I had sacrificed over the course of my career. And those things were plenty. And through mostly my fault, through mostly some of my decisions, sometimes, perhaps on the personal side, questionable in judgment, sometimes professionally induced, sometimes driven by a need to want to exceed the standards, to want to be where I felt I could be. All of those things, there was a cost to that. There was a cost that far exceeds a personal cost, and that cost sometimes is family and friends and people that get sort of steamrolled in the process, and that also weighs heavy on you at some point. So not only are you taking your own toll on your own body, mind, and soul, but eventually those things start catching up with you as well, and you realize like, what have I all sacrificed for this, for this gain, for the appeal of this gain. And so for me, as you alluded to, I was supposed to go back to the team as a ops NCO, and the boys are incredible and everybody's awesome. But as soon as they put me back in the group chat, I started realizing now I spent 2 years in the SM chair with a regular schedule. And even though it was a demanding role, it wasn't being on a team, slave to your phone, do all of the things incessantly, even though there is, an expectation that you will pick up at some point, but you're not on a 4-minute notice to move or anything, and so I think what ended up happening ultimately is the closer I got to returning to the team, the more I woke up, and I had a ton of anxiety. I could feel it in my gut. It was like a fire in my gut, and I just wondered why that was. I do have some anxiety, just like anybody else, but I don't generally dwell in anxiety very much. It's not something that's constant. And so when it was constant, then it had me question what's creating this, what's changed, what now, as I would address any other thing, any other calls, right? And I'm simplifying it because obviously, from a perspective, from the complexity of the human mind and soul and all of the things, it's a lot more complex than just one realm. You're dealing with something at face value, but the fact is, I knew that something was going on, and I just didn't know how to explain it or how to react to it. And so I looked at myself in the mirror one day and I just called myself out straight up. I'm like, you don't want to go back, do you? And as soon as I said that, as if I was talking to a third party, I had a sense of sort of inner peace fill my body, you know? And so I got my answer. I got my answer. It's like, no, you don't want to go back because you've experienced what it is after sacrificing all these years. You've experienced what it is to have some work-life balance. You've experienced what it is. You've also experienced something that was extremely uncomfortable, which was me doing something that I was completely out of my depth on. Absolutely. And I had no idea. For the first 6 weeks of my time in the SM chair, I didn't even want to wear the ranks because I didn't think I deserved to wear them. You know, I didn't know enough, do enough for my own good, for the collective as far as I was concerned. And so the whole mission became about what can I produce value for the members, for the collective on while I'm here, because right now I'm catching up and playing catch up because I spent 16 years in tactical operation, if that makes any sense. And so, of course, some of the attributes were transferable, like leadership and a variety of different things and problem solvings and dynamic situation, all of the things. But it was very different. It was administratively loaded. It was a lot of dealing with the head sheds and a lot of Ottawa dealings and a lot of those things, as you two would know better than most of us. It can be very challenging. And so, I think that in itself created a pathway for me that I realized after, say, 6 or 8 or 9 weeks in the SM chair, man, I can't bring value, and I should be here. Instead of, I was sort of fighting the imposter syndrome in the beginning, and I had to overturn that by applying myself to getting actionable items out. And so once I'd done that, there was a switch in my mindset, and the switch was, I can do whatever I want. I'm not a hostage to tactical operation. I'm not a hostage to a team, even though, trust me when I say this, I wasn't a hostage. I was there, of my very own will. But it created a pathway that made leaving an option. And so we have to backtrack almost 20 plus years. When I first joined the force, I did it to join a team. That is all I ever was interested in. I that's what I wanted to do since I was a boy, and that's never changed. And I did it. And when I realized that I wasn't going back there, then what? So there was the prospect floated by me of going the officer route and do all of the things and all things that you can get good work done if you're the right person. But I just had zero interest in it, really. And so I had to make a decision, and the decision was pretty easy. I think I can go out and do something else. No problem. I'm just going to sort of jump out of the airplane and build a parachute on the way down.
Easy to do. And Chris, I've taken most of the oxygen so far. Welcome, Chris, to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rob. No, I'm happy to listen, gentlemen. I think sometimes just the sake of hearing your own voice is something I can be above. One thing I would like to go to, though, Seb, is back when you mentioned the imposter syndrome. I think that's something that many members feel and fear, whether it's just going up a rank or going to a new section or even going to a different detachment. So what kind of, aside from a singular conversation with yourself where you're like, okay, I can do this, I deserve to do this, like, what is it that you did to prove to yourself you were wrong and you did deserve to be there? Like, dismiss luck.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that you put that said, like, here are my tangible skills, here are my tangible things, and how do you prove that to yourself, which in most cases is a member's biggest critic?
Yeah, 100%. And this is something I worked with actually with a lot of my clients in the performance coaching realm, which I've been involved for the last 5 years, a little less now, but over the course of the last 5 years, I've been doing a lot of that. You know, it's a really interesting thing because I think that one of the biggest misconception when it comes to other human beings and how they're processing life is to think that somehow they see it and vision it or experience it different than we do. And the reality is, most people don't. We all have very similar experiences. Yes, there are factors that are going to affect how we perceive and how, but really, it's not so much what is occurring, which is generally neutral. How we turn it is either a positive or a negative. And so I think that imposter syndrome says a bunch of things about a person. First of all, there is a certain degree of humility. Now, I'll qualify that because if somebody has imposter syndrome but their ego is fragile, then they may have to overcompensate for that imposter syndrome instead of let have the conversation about the things that I know and the things that I don't know, what I bring to the table, and let the people around me pick up where I need help and help me grow, right? But if the ego gets in the way, then an imposter syndrome can be a catastrophic thing where everybody knows you're incompetent, you do too, but you're just pretending you're not, and now the whole thing falls off the rails, right? But if you have a certain degree of imposter syndrome, that is a normal thing. We are humans, we are flawed, we have insecurities. Sometimes some of us more than others rely on external validation. There's a variety of different factors, and without psychoanalyzing everybody, I think at the end of the day you need to realize, what is it that I bring to the table, even if it isn't, say, cookie cutter what normally would be used in this role. So if you get a new promotion or you get something, well, let's start with I care. That's a massive plus. And so one of the exercises I used to do with some of my clients is just have them write it down. I want you to write down what it is that you bring to this job. you know everything. I'm generally not moody. I always have a smile on my face. I generally care for people. I can do work well. I can learn well. I can do all those things. So once they start breaking down, you know, uh, what they bring to the table, then it's easier to offset the thing they think they don't bring to the table. That's for one. And then once they do that and they sort of convince themselves or override the emotional, because let's face it, imposter syndrome is an emotional response. Emotions are meant to be a guidelines that something is going on internally, but they're not meant to drive the bus. You have to do something, you acknowledge the emotion, and then you move past and you go, okay, what do I need to do? How do I need to do so that I feel that I bring value, but also that I bring value to the members, and however long that takes. And so there's two things that need to happen. And A, you need to know exactly where you bring to the game. And B, you need to not be on a super catastrophic timeline. Give yourself a little bit of time. And this is a lesson that I learned from one of the very good leader I had when I was on the team. Ed Betcher is his name. I don't have a problem sending it out there, but Ed came to the team, and for the first literally 4 months, we didn't hear that man speak at all. He didn't say a single word. And he was taking it all in. He was learning a lot. He had 13 competent NCOs on the team. He was doing all the things that he was doing. And next thing we know, when he advised or when he said something after that amount of time, he had reasonably been on the sideline observing and taking it in and seeing what needed fixing, if anything. And he didn't touch any of the things that did need fixing. So he did it right. He gave, and I'm sure several times in the process, he wanted to say something, but he didn't. He just kind of held his peace and continued to listen to those that were in the spots doing the work and having the on the ground knowledge, so to speak, fill them in. And so for as long as the person that has the imposter syndrome needs that, it's normal to have it. A. Two, what do I bring to the table in this specific role? Even if it's, a Hail Mary, you got the role now. It's over. So what are you going to bring? What are you going to do? A lot of us have experienced that. I jumped a couple ranks going over to the SM's job. I mean, that was massively imposter syndrome inducing. And so now I'm sitting there going, okay, what am I going to bring to the table? Once I know what I have to bring to the table, now the next question is, how do I bring that to bear? How can I be of value? you know. And I think once those questions are answered or asked, even, then it starts a certain mindset. Find work, and that's something that we use extensively in a tactical work in the tactical world. When you're doing an entry or whatever, is this find the next job. What is the next job? What is the work? Where is the work? And how can you perform it? So those are essentially overriding mechanisms, overriding a very, very normal human emotion, which is feeling inadequate.
And in many ways, I would say it's a positive emotion. Like I would rather imposter syndrome to me necessitates a level of humility, which is
I
as you
agree.
started, and sort of the opposite of that is what I term incompetent arrogance, which can be as a result of too much of it, right? And this is I was on a course a number of years ago, and there was someone up there explaining, as a leader, when you get a question, if someone brings you a question, you don't know the answer. This I think it was a superintendent at the time said, I always carry papers with me whenever I walk around, because that way, if a member asks me something and I don't know the answer, I can say, actually, I just have to take this paper over to whoever. And I don't have to then explain that I don't know the answer, which I thought was an absolute horrible, horrible suggestion and a good way to convince everybody that you should never be trusted. Like, how about this as a suggestion? Um, I don't know the answer to that. Like, I know that's a crazy, crazy thought, but that's okay, right? And I don't, excesses on either end are good. Um, and sort of a bit of a stoicism and a bit of a humility in any leader is positive. But yeah, I think we all suffer from that. I certainly have some of that. Whenever I've gone to a different role, a different team, current one, whatever. Um, and you're also told regularly, I think, a lot of people, that confidence and arrogance sometimes get conflated. Um,
100%.
so, so there are some people who just they're very confident. They go in, they do the job, they whatever. I do like the idea that Ed's approach there, right? Go into a new team and listen first, as opposed to going in with all the ideas, all the fixes for what may ail any given unit.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's a lot of internal mechanisms when it comes to why humans are doing the things they do, and unless a person spends a great deal of time introspecting, it's very difficult. And oftentimes, for us on the outside, if you're looking at something that's a symptomology of a certain personality type, of perhaps a lifelong of events that have created a person reacting a certain way, like we are not great at looking at it through the eye of compassion. And I think part of the reason of that's the case is because some of our people and are out there doing the thing and they need it right now. They really don't care what the story is, about the person. And I think that there is a certain dehumanizing that happens there. And I think that it's really important that we don't sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to assessing other people's behaviors, because we have our own shortcomings to be dealing with, and I think that's the harder job. Everybody is very, very quick to identify shortcomings in everybody else, very very slow in a recognizing and addressing themselves. And so if somebody is creating an issue for a unit or creating an issue in leadership in one way or another, and say they have a perceived ego, they may not even know they have imposter syndrome. At some point, I think inner feelings are getting lost on people. There's so many chaotic emotions going on with them and their general negotiation of life, that I think that a lot of times they don't even have a clue. And so, if I had one thing to say is, you know, whether you think you have or whether you don't think you have imposter syndrome, write it down anyways. What do you bring to this new role? What do you intend to? What is the vision that you have of it? What are some of the inherent qualities that you have that are valuable for that role? And we're making mistakes, man. That's just the way it is. But I think that failure to have a plan is a probably a bigger mistake.
That would bring me into feedback, and feedback isn't just from a supervisor, it's from people on our team, same rank, or people who report to us. But like, what type of feedback did you find useful to yourself? And in turn, was there a different style of feedback that you liked to provide?
Yeah. Oh man. I didn't always do it right. Right. I didn't always do it right when I was a young leader on say, even at Depot as a right marker, for example, if I could go back in time, I would change pretty much everything about how I did things and how I communicated. I literally would. And I know, we understand that the growth process it was necessary to happen that way in order for me to be the guy I'm standing in front of you. I understand all those things. But I mean, it was definitely a lot of trial and errors, there was a ton of trial and error going on and doing it and being on the other end of it after and seeing what works and what doesn't work, until I started sort of realizing that humans are like these Rubik's cubes. You have to, not everybody and nobody is cookie cutter to the person you just spoke to or the person you're going to speak after. So you need to have the ability to sort of on the spot figure out what communication strategy is working better. And when I say strategy, I don't mean it in a nefarious way. What am I going to make up for that person to think that what I'm saying is right? It's more, how do I connect with that person through verbiage, through a conversation, through my nonverbal, through all of those things. And I think that, sometimes you don't always have the option of having extended conversations or to really get to know somebody at the baseline level. And so when you can't, you have to do what you can. And so ultimately, I think surrounding yourself with the type of people that you want to work with. So I know for me, going on the teams and being in these units that I was in my entire service, you just get it, right? You just get it. You just receive the feedback. It's not always a smooth delivery. It's not always the way you would like to, but a really wise woman known as my mom used to say that when somebody says something to you and you have a really sort of visceral reaction to it, just think about what was said, because something in there is of value, you know. And I think that as we're standing here having the conversations about how we should be addressing people and how we should be in the professional sense, I think it's important for the person doing the talking, and it's important for the receiver to play along, right? It's a two-part series here. It's not just about me catering my message to you. It's about you having the filter necessary to receive the message in a way that's conducive to collaboration versus the way that we normally see it. I did something wrong. You're providing me feedback, and now I don't like it. I don't like your tone. I don't like how you're providing it. I don't like that you're inaccurate in your information, whatever the case may be. And now I'm on the defensive. Now I fight back, and now you get defensive, and now we escalate the whole thing, and it goes nowhere, right? I think that the responsibilization of understanding that communication is a 50-50 responsibility, no matter what the conversation is about. The person is coming to you with a thought out strategy or some sort of plan on how they want to address certain things, and they're not going to be perfect, and you are not going to be perfect in your reception of the information. And so once we acknowledge our weakness as humans, and when I say weakness, I mean especially emotionally while dealing with, with other humans and human interactions, I think we tend to see things a little bit more through the lens of compassion and have a little bit more patient. And if you add to this the fact that you're on your 17th night shift in a small detachment that's understaffed, all the things, you're compounding issues here. And so there's nothing wrong also to have a conversation. And if it hits a point where the conversation gets counterproductive, I need to sit with this information for a little while, and I will come back to you. I just don't think there's a massive point in us just, going on this tangent. I don't think it's going to bring us any, it's not going to lead to the desired outcome, but what can we sit on for a little bit,
Yeah, there's a certain amount of grace that's required by both sides, right? I always try, even in my personal life or otherwise, and I don't necessarily succeed, but I try to try and approach feedback in whatever form it arrives with a sort of a first position that this person isn't my enemy, right? This person is, maybe something they're saying is actual proper feedback. And rather than my initial defense mechanisms get up for why I'm justifying my own actions and whatever that looks like, maybe there is something there, right? And I think time helps with that, as you pointed out. I think taking a step back, because I know for myself, like almost my first reaction on most of that is still, and even though I know and I'm trying to not allow it, my first reaction is almost defensive, right? It's almost like, you know, you must be wrong. It's almost like that's our preset condition as humans, or at least as cops, because we have to have a certain level of cynicism to be an effective police officer. I will maintain that. You can't just be super trusting and walk along, not aware of your surroundings and just assume everybody's good. Like that's probably not ideal as a cop. And then you flip that around, you get into the office and you're getting feedback, and that whole cynicism and that whole distrust that you've maybe built up over years, now you got to let that wall down. And that is not an easy thing to do. From my estimation, I think it's very challenging.
Yeah, dude. There's so much there. We could do an entire episode on that, right? There's certain things that are inherent to human beings. Pride is one of them, right? And pride, unfortunately, is very seldom beneficial. It rears its ugly head almost in everything, and without even us realizing that that's the case. And that is very apparent in, say, interpersonal relationships, like romantic relationships. It certainly can be, as it is so viscerally engaging. But think of it this way. Most people go to a bank, for example, and somebody butts in front of them in the line. And if they have to ask them to move behind because they just cut off in the middle of the line, you'll see them shake. Like they actually have an adrenaline dump. Like humans are not great at addressing things that are uncomfortable, that could be perceived as conflictual, right? And so it's not unusual for a human being to have a less than stellar delivery when saying something if they are anticipating retaliatory actions. So if I come in your office and I've made up this thing in my mind that you're going to react a certain way when I call it and tell you like it is. So there's two things that I think is important to remember here. When I go somewhere and I start priming myself, I'm going to go in there and tell them like it is, and this is what I do anyways, and all this stuff, you're adding fuel to the fire. You're doing nothing right now. You're posturing. So you're inflating your pride or your ego in front of all these other people that you're, letting them know how you're going to do X, Y, and Z and all this thing. Now, not only that, but now you're going to prime yourself to an unreasonable standard, and you're going to walk in there and you're going to have the humility of a hand grenade, and then the person that's on the receiving end of this is going to respond in a way that's very likely to put fuel on the fire. And so there's a few things that happen here. It's not about what, and your wife and your husband probably often say this to you, it's not about what you said, is how you said it, and generally it is the case. And so I think that, again, in a 50-50 responsibility between the person doing the talking, the receiver, what is my responsibility? My responsibility is to diffuse whatever it is. So if you come in, Rob, and all of a sudden you're like all jacked up and everything, I got a choice to make here. It's going to hurt. It always does. Like it's going to pinch and my ego will take a hit, but that's okay. What is the greater good here? I have to hold myself back from retaliating immediately, or else we're going to go into a weapons race. So sometimes as a leader, it can be tough, but sometimes it's like, let the person vent, let them go. Like it doesn't matter, And when they're done and they started sort of, de-escalating on their own, so to speak, because anger burns really quickly, generally also burns the person that uses it. Eventually the person, when they're not receiving, the feedback that they thought they were going to receive or what they expected they were going to receive, they start going down. And so now you can kind of meet him somewhere where it's reasonable to have a conversation, and you can do it in a way that's conducive to that conversation, not necessarily blowing up and escalating. So this is where that 50-50 comes in. But if you're to have a conversation with somebody, instead of assigning a level of responsibility to their nefarious action in retaliation to what you're about to say, do not make this stuff up. You have no idea, right? And then somebody will say, well, yeah, but I know that person. Well, then, okay, well, if you know that person, that's a bonus, because now you can cater your style of communication with the understanding that that person has the potential to do X, Y, and Z. Now, there's always going to be an outlier. There's always going to be somebody that you can't reason with, but the vast majority of people are not like that. That is not going to be your majority. And so you get two choices. You end your bet on the side that most people you deal with are going to be like that, and you make your life an absolute hell, or you act in a way that's conducive to the 80%, and the 20% that you'll encounter in your career, then so be it. Right? Maybe you get somebody else to talk to them or whatever. I don't know what the scenario is here. It's completely fictitious, right? But I think Patton said it best. The person who flanked first wins. Everybody is very good, especially prideful police officers, very good to go head to head. Everybody wants to go head to head. But the fact is, oftentimes the best way is the flank, right? And that's accurate both tactically and strategically. And so if we know that that's the flank, then stop going head to head and hitting your head against the wall. Find an alternative way. Use a creative way to deal with this problem that you've been banging your head on the wall, for.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know who had a lot of pride? Custer.
Custer sure did.
Right. And how'd that turn out? So pride isn't necessarily a positive. Again, history buffs can give me all sorts of, shit for why I'm wrong on that. But
yeah.
That's fine. I'm going to switch topics a little bit. You have a little bit of martial arts training through your life. Started, I think, probably just before you were born. Try to punch and kick your way out.
And the amniotic fluid.
Yeah. So, I know you've trained Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, you're black belt in Jiu-Jitsu, probably many others. So, for policing, what was there one or another that you would suggest would be ideal? Like, so I'm a cop. I grew up on a farm in Saskatchewan. There weren't a lot of martial arts studios. We all took karate and we learned some katas. So that was good. But now I'm a cop. I'm 30 years old. I'm working in Yellowknife, and all of a sudden I'm getting in more scuffs than I like. So thoughts on that? Like, what would be a good thing to get into? Let's pretend you're starting with, you're relatively fit, but you have no background, and not someone who started training when they're 16.
Yeah, that's a massive rabbit hole. It's a massive rabbit hole, but it's actually pretty simple. So we have to look at what is the task. The task is moving in at some point to either, quote unquote, test the waters or proceed with an arrest, physically or otherwise. And if the tools are out of play for one reason or another, so let's take all the tools out of the equation here, because I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of tactically breaking this down. But so we've made a decision for one reason or another to go hands-on. We need to move within range. So we need to be from outer reach range to in reach range, right? And then we need to go into hook range, where we actually get closer to the person and have to effect an arrest when we're in other. So what are some of the risk? Well, the risk are haymakers coming your way as you are approaching on approach, or any other strikes from the person standing in front of you. Strikes are an interesting thing because you can be a world-class fighter and a lucky punch still gets you out, right? This is so aside from the optics, which of course is horrible, even though if it's legally articulated, by all means, go for it. But it's not ideal if there are other options available to you. And so, but you need to be able to protect against strike. You need to be able to return strikes should you need to. You need to be able to do some sort of clinching or grabbing so that you may initiate some sort of takedown, which means that now you need some sort of takedown strategy and capability. but you also need ground control, because if you take the person down and you can't control them on the ground, then they're up again, right? So now you've lost that. So really, you need to be a less of a specialist and more of a generalist. And that goes for physical fitness. It goes for martial artists as well. And we can talk at length on that because there's a lot there that can be broken down. And there's outliers in both of those categories, and they can do just fine, as long as they're aware of certain things. And so if I was to take a young member, instead of doing, say, rings like they do in depot. Now, I say like they do in depot, and I haven't spoken to the depot crowd in quite some time, so I might be very disconnected. But as far as last time I checked, they were still segregating striking and grappling and, wrestling or takedown or whatever it was. And so I think that that's a mistake. We need to do more of a mixed martial arts approach to the combatives, right? Where you kind of have to do it all, not just moving in, striking, and then, okay, but because there's no transition time. Now we're going to start on the ground. Now we're going to start here. So you have to be able to do all those things. So long story short, or long story not so short, to say mixed martial art is probably your best bet if you know very little about anything. Now, if you have a decent amount of striking, and if you're comfortable with protecting yourself against strike and returning fire if you need to, judo is probably your best as a law enforcement officer. Let's call a spade here. That's what we do. Hook people up, do the thing, feet over tea kettle, and they end up on the ground in a controlled fashion, and you're on top using your ground control to control them. So judo is probably, I would say, for me, next in line, and then jiu-jitsu followed very closely. Now, jiu-jitsu, you can use judo takedowns, and you practice judo takedowns, provided that you don't start on your butt, on your knees when you do jiu-jitsu. You can be very effective because obviously jiu-jitsu ground control is unmatched, right? So if you're doing jiu-jitsu, just remember to protect against strike, to learn to protect and to practice protect against strike, and to have a takedown strategies. How many jiu-jitsu tournament do you watch and the guys are driving around in circle holding each other because they don't know what to do, and then eventually one of them pulls guard, which should be illegal in policing anyways, and so all of those things. Now, you don't need when you have these conversations, a lot of people have it into their minds that they have to train 5 days a week, every week for 10 years to have a level of proficiency that's better than the average human. To fight better than the average human, you need to train twice a week for 3 months. Like, I'm not exaggerating, right?
What if, but quick question, what if there's someone who sees red and needs to be held back, bro?
Yes,
like
the see-red person.
The see-red person, or the hold me back, bro people. Like both of those I assume are a different category. Like,
those are, I mean, we're talking nuclear capabilities here. I can't speak to that. I'm not at that level. But what's interesting is oftentimes a lot of our members grew up on farms, as you were alluded to earlier, but also played hockey, and some of them were hockey goons or whatever. Those are incredible tools to have, but also you can be the best striker in the world. And I've seen this. I was on a training trip in Thailand in 2009, and I watched a man by the name of Kru Yod, and he was an absolute savage with 475 Muay Thai fights, and most of them were wins. And they start fighting professionally at 5 in Thailand, just so people here understand. And what happened there was Kru Yod was training for a transition into MMA, and he was submitted by a jiu-jitsu blue belt with 2 years of training in 38 seconds without firing a single effective strike. And it really taught me something. It taught me that I don't care, because trust me on this, my level of striking is nowhere near the first, double digit of that guy's fight pedigree. And so there is no way most humans walking around wouldn't know what a guy with 475 professional fight actually is like. There is nothing you can do with that. And so that says to the striker, you need to be able to not only recognize, but you need to be able to defend the takedown strategies, and you need to be able to have some ground. You can't pretend that because you don't like close physical contact on the ground, that somehow it's unnecessary or that you don't need it. You absolutely do need it. And so well-roundedness is the name of the game. A little consistency, especially coming out a depot, and I would say throughout your service, even if it's attending a class or two here and there, it doesn't really matter so much because there's so much more that you're going to have to be able to do and see. Now, one of the problems that we have in policing is getting anybody to train. That's extremely difficult to do. And part of the reasons are reasons that we already spoke about. People are exhausted and people are overworked and all of the things. But the fact is, we have a responsibility to be able to do what we're going to do. And there's an outcome bias that seeps insidiously inside the police officers' minds that if nothing wrong happened, it must be because they're doing it right. Instead of, if nothing wrong happens, I've been lucky, because if it does, I got nothing, right? And I can tell you from experience, having had these guys on the mats coming in and expecting certain things and realizing how helpless they were, the look of shock on their faces, understanding, essentially exposing themselves to themselves, which is precisely what you want to be doing, because hiding it is simply going to make that problem worse. But once you're able to out yourself to yourself, then you can address the issue and really take it on. But it's a lot less and a lot more than most people think in many ways. A little consistency goes a really long way.
Chris?
Yeah, I like the rolling. I mean, along with that comes, I guess, fitness. And that's not just kind of, the juice monkey, lift as much as you can. Flexibility goes a long way. So
Yes.
stretching, nutrition, like all these things are intrinsically linked. And then you could go down the rabbit hole, as Seb says, to mental health and the benefits associated to them, right? So I think holistically, when we talk about one of these things, that's good. But when we're asking police officers, or anyone, frankly, but first responders in general who live this lifestyle of, today, I'm staying awake with animals that are nocturnal, but 2 days from now, I'm going to be trying to sleep like a normal human. Then I'm going to get up earlier than everyone else, do a 12-hour work day. Like, we're just constantly in flux. And so what I think we failed to do a good job of organizationally, institutionally, and are just starting to culturally recognize is, like, people need foundation. They don't need something from this circle and then nothing from that circle. Like, it's kind of like the Canada Food Guide. Like, we need a bit of all of this. And these are the conversations, I think, where we help people build foundation and find balance, because they're all linked.
Man, I wish the Canada Food Guide wasn't horrible, but I know what you're saying there.
Yeah, we are not nutritionists, by the way, but please don't follow the Canada Food Guide please.
Or
If you're telling
else
me
you can
I
just
can-
divert half your paycheck to, what was that? You're sending half your wallet to Big Pharma over the course of, but no, Chris, you're making a great point here, and that's the point about interconnectedness. And I think that we do a very poor job of understanding that the body, the mind, the soul, all of those realms are interconnected. All of the modalities that we use or don't use are interconnected. So you don't get to say, I do this, but I don't do that. I don't like that. Well, it's cool that you don't like it, but it's still needed, because you're missing out on something here that's really going to help you holistically. And the interconnectedness, the way to describe it for me is, the body is sort of a pulley system. You have pulleys everywhere, and if you pull on a rope anywhere, all the pulleys move somehow, and I think that we tend to silo information for two reasons. A, it makes it more manageable and palatable. And B, if I start thinking about everything being interconnected, there is no real actionable item to speak of if my brain starts going down these rabbit holes. And so I think it's just a matter of education. But you are absolutely right. I'd rather see somebody do 1 day of combatives a week, have a decent generalistic training program in functional fitness, whatever that is. And if you want to be a specialist because you're a strong man or whatever, you still are going to need to run. so you still to offset whatever specialty you do. And I absolutely, just to be clear, I do not want to come across like I'm bashing specialists, because there are members out there that are, incredible strongmen or athletes of one form or another that benefit greatly from their training, that potentially wouldn't be training if they weren't doing this, or they would be doing something else that may not be as valuable. So I just don't want to make it sound like somehow being a specialist is a negative. But policing generally tends to punish the specialist. You want to be a generalist. You want to be able to do it all. And if you have a specialty, you want to make sure that you offset it with the things that operationally you might be demanded to tap into. And so, but having this conversation about a guy training or a girl training, once a week in combatives, have a couple good workouts, have a hike, whatever. Like, it doesn't need to be this big intricate plan that has 17 different moving parts and all of the things, and not everything needs to be 2.5 hours long. When I see people train for some of the amounts of times that they're spending training, I'm like, no wonder you don't train. If I left the house 4 hours every time I train, I'd never train. It's just very difficult to motivate. And so this brings us back to the martial arts questions from earlier. Guys are said to me before, like, what should I be doing? No gi or gi, for example. So this is with or without the jiu-jitsu uniform. And my thing is, do whatever brings you to the mats. So if for you, I don't know, strongman modalities is what brings you to the gym, then do strongman. Just realize that as a strongman with a 600-pound squat, that 1.5 mile sprint you might have to do is going to be horrible, right? And so, and you have to be capable of doing it. So as long as we're sort of introspective and balancing the risk, nobody is going to be everything to anything. You can't be everything to everything. Does that make sense?
Just Johnny Kim. There's only one person
That's right.
that can do it. Johnny Kim can. An astronaut, engineer, medical doctor,
Navy SEAL.
Navy SEAL. So
ex-Navy SEAL.
But other than him, you can't. Actually, speaking of that, Navy SEAL, DJ Shipley. I was watching a podcast with him recently, and he was talking about like micro wins and not setting yourself up for failure. And I think that's a bit of what you're saying here is you can easily. I'll use myself as a example. I recently got my blue belt in jiu-jitsu, and I think I first did a class or two, like, I don't know what years, like a long time ago, like 2009, maybe 2010. Now I've had multiple surgeries, wrist reconstructed, multiple finger surgeries, blah, blah, blah. So I missed time here. I travel a ton for work, and it's tough. You got kids, you got all this stuff. And so but you just keep chipping away. And every time I go, I'll get a new lesson in how much I need to learn by somebody. And, it's funny because I was a cop before I did it. I had about 10 years service probably before I started. And I'd worked up north for a long time and been involved in not a small number of physical interactions with clients, let's call it. And I felt pretty confident. Like I always felt quite confident in my abilities. And, I'm not exactly the biggest guy on earth. I think I graduated from depot at 137 pounds because I was running 120 miles a week because racing was my thing back then. But I felt pretty confident. And then I went to some jiu-jitsu classes, and like a 13-year-old girl was submitting me in 3 minutes. Now she's gone on to become a world champion, so I give myself that. Lillian Marchand, who's an absolute beast out of Vernon.
Beast, yeah.
Like, but she was 13 and submitting me every time we rolled. And it was, it's a little humiliating, but also just to take that and say, okay, I need to improve in this area. But also it didn't become my life. I couldn't. There's too many other things, too many other priorities. So I did that. I still hit the gym or whatever. And I'm chipping away. And like one day the goal, I want a black belt, but I might be 90. That's just, I can't give 5 hours, 6 hours a week. I just don't have the time. But that's not a reason not to do it, right? Like, it's not a reason, just because you can't read an entire book in one sitting is not a reason not to read, right? Like the end is not necessarily the means.
This is this is super interesting in weaving it into what DJ was talking about, because I mean, we've spoken about this even on a collective like 4 years ago very extensively. It's that idea that in order to start anything, you need to be able to complete it, to see it to the end right now. That's the concept of instant gratification, which leads into procrastination, which leads into this never happens. I call it the later syndrome, because later never happens, right? And so I think understanding that the getting the black belt isn't the goal. Getting better at ground control is the goal. And every day that you attend class, whether you're regressing at that class or you're moving forward at that class, you're always moving forward in your learning of skills and your ability to operationalize those skills. And so I think those micro wins are incredibly important. Yes, I will go to jiu-jitsu this week. That's the only time that I can make. And I'm going to go and do an hour or two or whatever. Well, that's an hour or two better than you were last week. It just is, right? And aside from the obvious, which is all of the mental health benefit and all of the things that come along with that. And so it's very hard to convince I've been in combatives for my entire career, and every friend that I had in any agencies anywhere in the world aside from in Europe has a hard time motivating their members to do combatives. Every single one of them, without a single exception. And so there is institutionalized and personal resistance to that. And I think a big part of that is the fear of exposure. There's other factors, and there's some organizations that have done some academic research on that. What's the name now? With ARI over there in Victoria PD. I'm forgetting the name of the organization now. But anyway, they've done sort of a fairly serious and substantial academic project on that, and established a variety of other reasons, which are the constants when it comes to this. But I think as an underpinning, oftentimes the fear of exposure, the fear of injury, those types of things. But it's like, if you're better to edge your bet on potentially twist an ankle here and there during your career as a trainer than you are in getting annihilated in a fight on a street corner, and we've seen it, like catastrophic beatings that cops have taken, catastrophic beatings. And so I think it's important to recognize that it is a reality. It's a reality that is low probability, and as a result of that, it's low probability, but it's high consequences. And that's the things that are hard to motivate people to get engaged in. And that seems to be a thing almost everywhere. Now, Europe has it very differently, because as part of their hiring process, a lot of these organizations, especially in the sort of ERT equivalent, say GIGN or RAID or whatever, like these guys have to be fighting machines before they even attend selection, right? And they have to be able to fight at a pretty high level. The vast majority of their guys are fighters anyways. But even in their patrol assets, there's a lot of combatives, a lot more than what we have at Depot. It's very, very a big sort of part of the culture. And so I digress. There's a lot of other skills that cops need to have, obviously, and we all, can't be everything to everything. So we have to sort of be risk managing. But I think that low consequence or high consequence, low probability events are probably the most difficult one to motivate for.
Yep, for sure. Chris?
No, I was just kind of reflecting on that. I think so much of that is policing in general, unfortunately, and the way that many things are approached. Often it's referred to as risk management. But if we do not actually train for the specific incidents, like, why do we spend so much time working on IARD? Well, unfortunately, bad things had to happen before we moved to that. But those are high risk incidents with low probability. And so much of what we do in our job does require specialization. But frontline policing, or general duties, I mean, it says it in the name, you have to be a specialist when it's called for, but you can't be a specialist in everything, right? You can't be the heart surgeon, oncologist, who's also going to go ahead and look at your feet as the podiatrist. Like, but that's what we ask frontline policing to do, is we say, hey, we need this from you. Just go ahead and do everything until it explodes. And there's not always the resources. There's not everything. Like, if you're in a big center, great. We have IHAR, or ICAR, IHIT, integrated ERT teams. The I is integrated, in case anyone didn't guess. But if I'm in, let's just say, Polituck, Rob, you can relate to this. I picked this specifically for you. How many people are coming to back you up?
Exactly.
If the plane's not flying, you got what you brought. And that is so important, the idea that we invest in ourselves, right? And Seb, your point about, look, you're 1 or 2 hours better than you were last week. I think that's hugely motivating, because there's so many things that we as police officers used to do. And I literally was reflecting on this earlier today. Like, I was writing down a list of things I enjoy doing, and then reflecting on how many of them I don't actually do. And then I was like, all right, I probably should try and anchor myself back to a couple of these things that I say I like doing, but I don't do. And I don't have enough time. I have kids. I'm on the road all the time. Like, there's all these reasons, and they're all valid. But it's also valid to say, like, look, we need to do this. And when we talk about the things that literally could save our lives or the lives of other people, I think that's all the more validity to be like, okay, let's make 2 hours to roll or grapple or whatever you're into. If I want to spend 2 hours to get Pokemon cards back or ice hockey, it's a different story. Definitely Pokemon cards weren't that high on my list, but I used to.
I enjoyed the Pokemon era, I will say. When that was going on and there were zombies walking the streets looking at their phones all night, I really did enjoy that. That was it a year? Maybe it was a year and a half. Like, it didn't go on forever, but you're like, why are all these oddly dressed young humans walking around looking at their phones at 2 a.m.? And then
it was a year too long.
Yeah, it was.
There's a few things just to kind of wrap up this whole combatives things. I don't want to spend more time on this more than is required, but there is organizational need, right? And we understand that. I never hinge my hat on that coat hanger, so to speak, because I knew this was never going to happen in a way that would have been satisfying for me. It just wouldn't. So I took it on, but I understand the frustration behind that, and should be people being paid to train 100%. Should people be given time to train? Absolutely. If the operational context allows for it, all of those things. At the end of the day, when it's between going back to your family or backing up a member or doing the things that you need to be doing and not being able to do them, are you going to go back and be like, well, I wish they gave me X, Y, and Z? Or are you going to say, man, I should have done that? Right. And generally, unfortunately, we're very quick to download blame until something visceral happens where we are being deconstructed. And when that happens, all of a sudden we take the blame for what we didn't do. Right. So I think that addressing risk in relation to others rather than to ourselves, like if I want to go into an encounter and get myself flipped upside down, that's my prerogative. But unfortunately, your partners and the members of the public are certain expectations that we should be able to do certain things. That's not to say that we should be the strongest, the fastest, the best, and all the things, but at least fundamentally have some fundamental capacity. And we're seeing over and over again in these forces, use of force encounters of law enforcement officers, people that clearly have never spent a single second worrying about that at all, right? And unfortunately, at some point, you end up all over YouTube, and you got 4 million views for your lack of commitment, right? And so I think that that's something that is important to realize. Also, from a leadership standpoint, leaders out there, there's some leaders out there. I can think of a few that have enabled people to either train when they could, or train their crew, or have even purchase mats or do whatever, and really sort of support. But there's been quite a few horror stories of guys really trying to do some good stuff all over the country and being shut down by leaders that want nothing to do with any of this. You live in the 80s and you weren't even born in the 80s. We got a problem, like that old school mentality. It absolutely needs to go, because the caliber of people that we deal with out in the street now, with their propensity and their capacity for violence, is unmatched. And you can thank mixed martial art for that, right? And from a weapons perspective, we now have more than ever, and the propensity to use them is also higher. And so this is a very different time to be policing. This isn't the 80s. We ought to have certain capacity, and so it's important for leaders in the organization to realize that and try to facilitate their people receiving the proper training.
Yeah, and of course we're talking about physical. There's the same philosophy can go much beyond that, right? And shout out to Tyson, the Green Timbers Judo Club, right? And those who are supporting that. Like, there is a movement. I know a bunch of different detachments that have bought mats and they're doing the training. And to your point about, I guess, what the outcome, what the goal should be. It's not about whether you and I can train for the rest of my life. There's not a day that we're going to put on gloves and do stand up and I'm going to kick your ass. Like, that's not going to happen, right? Like, and there's no point pontificating about the potential. Like, that's just not. Okay, great. You're 6'1", 200 pounds. I'm 5'. I can barely hit your chin. So I'm going to be, punching you in the chest. Like, that's not going to happen. That's not the point. The point is, can I be better than I am, right? And that can be physical, that can be mental, that can be mental health, that could be, moving to a farm. All the humans that are police officers are humans first, and we want them to be healthy humans first. And what that looks like, and if it's, I think self-improvement, and I'm going to ask, go for just a couple more minutes if you got time there, Seb.
Oh, yeah, I'm good.
You are a lifelong learner, I will call you. You are always taking some new course or writing, so I want to talk a little bit about, and these two topics, motivation, dedication, because motivation is a weird, fleeting thing. Dedication is more something you can control, I think. But I want to talk a little bit about that, about just how do you keep that going? Because it's not necessarily for a specific goal. It's not, it's one thing to say, I'm going to train because I need to be better at jiu-jitsu because that'll help me in my job. But that's only one aspect. You're not necessarily taking the courses you're taking or whatever because it's a specific desired outcome. The path, the journey can be part of that desired outcome. So just, can you talk a little bit about, motivation, dedication, and why you think it's important to continuously develop and learn, even mentally?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have, what's his name now, pastor in the States, really, really popular sort of speaker.
Al Sharpton?
No, not that guy. His name escapes me right now, unfortunately. Brown. Les Brown. So Les Brown.
Yeah.
Les Brown was a great motivational speaker. Once said something along the lines of, most people die when they're 35 and they don't get buried until they're 75. And that's actually true. And if you look around you, unfortunately, the manifestation of the things that people are projecting onto their reality is real. And if people start saying at 35, well, I'm no longer 20, and you are literally aging yourself. Like, your body is listening, everything is happening. Things are like, okay, well, I guess we're done. It's packing up, and you're slowly starting to, those words that you were using so casually and sometimes even as pleasantries have the potential to be massively detrimental to your overall life experience, however long that might be. And I think that life average time span has proven that most of us will live to be old, and so I think there is there is an incredible amount of value in realizing that for as long as you live, you will try to get better at things. It really doesn't matter. And in doing so, you're going to help others get better. And you're, the whole motivation slash sacrifice thing, but those two things are not necessarily disconnected. And I disagree with certain mindset that discipline, that sacrifice is completely to be overshadowed, while as discipline is where the sole focus should be. So I agree with the fact that discipline is doing the things that you don't want to do and do them anyways, right? But when you do that and you achieve a certain level of macro wins, what do you get? Well, you get epinephrine and adrenaline, which is motivation, right? It's just a scientific process of what motivation actually is. And so it's important to understand that if you are disciplined and if you are setting small, short goals and you reach those goals, so whatever that might be for you. So say I'm no longer operationally active. How about I want to be around for my kids? Or how about I want to be around to be able to defend myself when I'm 60? Or what about I want to be fit so I can go do the base camp at Everest or whatever it is. Like, set something for yourself. Set something for yourself, whatever that looks like. Competing in that next strongman competition, or being, a world-class mountain climbers. Like, I don't care what it is. And it could be just being an average mountain climber. It could be being somebody that will be tethered to a rope and will be super average, right? And so I think that to me, it's critically important as humans that we keep our brains sharp, that we keep our bodies, healthy as long as we can, because unfortunately it doesn't work that you're super healthy and all of a sudden you die. Sometimes it does. Mostly it doesn't. Generally what happens is you're super healthy, then you start backsliding, and eventually you're a complete mess for like 25 years until you die. That's generally what happens. So if the goal is to write off the upper portion of your life, by all means go for it. But I don't think that's what anybody wants. I think very few people want this willfully. They just don't realize it's happening. And just like anything else, when you talk to these people later, I shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? And so for me, it's always about keeping my mind as sharp as it can be, keeping my body as fit as it can be. And like, I'm broken from my years on the teams. I have a leg missing from stupidness and a variety of other things. And there's a lot of things that come into play that are going to take a toll on you as life unfolds. But your ability to take the hits and driving on is often hinges on how much work you are putting in on the daily, to maintain a certain level of wellness. So I'll give you an example of this. When this thing happened with the leg in 21, a lot of people have said to me, man, you're so physical your entire life, you must be dying. And I'm like, no, actually I'm not, because I was also doing academic things. And I was doing other things, another language, another this and that, And so you have anchors. You're not anchored to one anchor point. And if that anchor point is not bomb proof and it ends up going, now you're free falling because you have nowhere else that contributes to your identity, so to speak, without defining you. Does that make sense? And so, yeah, I gave you a big convoluted answer, but basically we are an amalgamation of a variety of different things. And those things can be worked on individually to benefit the collective. And if something happens in one of those realms and you have all these anchors in all these other realms, you are in business. You're not falling apart. You're not imploding. You're going to take a back seat to certain things that you may love to do, but you're going to get the other things that you probably should have spent a little bit more time doing to be better. And so that is all there is to it for me. I just don't see a time where I'm going to stop. Like, I still go to school. And I think part of that is because I didn't do very well in school when I was in high school, and I got kicked out and did all kinds of stupidness. And I think that once I realized, man, school can be a lot of fun if you pick what you're doing. I just decided that I was going to keep going, that I was going to, continue with it for as long as I'm alive. So if that leads me into nothing, so be it. If it leads me into some sort of, doctorate, then so be it, right? But yeah, I mean, all of those things are life engagement. Like, how do you not engage in this journey?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris, go ahead.
No, I just mindful of the time. I don't know if we need to wrap up or if we're going to push into another topic.
I have one last question. So wrote a book with Sean Taylor. What's that about? When's it coming out? Where will people be able to get it?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's two books coming out. So one of them is in editing right now. This one is now the name is going to escape me now. The High Fidelity Mind. So the High Fidelity Mind is out now. That was almost entirely Sean Taylor's brainchild. I've assisted in very minimally, and I will be assisting on the back end. But it's sort of it's not necessary to be read for our joint book, which is The Warrior in the Garden, which we've been working on since 21. But it is a nice preamble, a precursor, a fundamental read prior to diving into The Warrior in the Garden. So The Warrior in the Garden, to keep it really simple, is sort of 14 tenets that we go over, and it's really an amalgamation of incredible life experience and wisdom acquired through, the high performance realms that both Sean and I were in, but as well as all of the friends and guests that we have that are, top performers in various fields and have instructed and led top performers in various fields. And so, but it's a very holistic approach to it. So it really talks about everything. We might be talking about relationship. We might be talking about, and I mean, we all, through this process, we all, through the process of dialectics, so to speak, we all also evolved as humans, realizing how much messing up we had done, right? So when I speak to these topics, it's not spoken to from an elitist perspective, or yeah, you should never do this because I never did. It was like, no, we messed up all of those things, and here are some of the lesson learns from some of the highest performers and how they're managing to do the things they do as well as they do and be holistic in their approach. So they also maintain wellness, capacity, relationships, all of those things. And so it's just an incredible piece of work that we started working on in 2021, and we simply weren't ready to develop the material in the way that the material was developed. Now there's a bit of a spiritual story behind that, but I'll leave it for now. But I was seeking ways to make this book happen and how it should and what should be in it and all of those things, and asked for questions and received answers. And basically we used that as a baseline, briefed Sean, and we got going on those very topics that we have discussed extensively on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of podcasts, the collective, of course, and the dialectics that we're involved in, just to try to bring to the collective actionable items about things that are creating issues for people. And we spoke about imposter syndrome earlier. Well, that's in there, and there's a variety of other things. So it's a really, really, really powerful book that I think has a ton of potential. But what happens when it hits the gate is totally not of my concern, because there's absolutely nothing I could have done better, or Sean. Like, we've given everything we had to the process. We've given everything we had to what's in it, and the chip will fall as it may. Now, as far as the release date, so the issue that we ran into is the High Fidelity Mind was, a lot of the stuff was part of the Warrior in the Garden, and eventually we realized if we don't make this two books, the book is gonna just consume itself, so to speak. Like, it just wasn't gonna go anywhere, and we were gonna lose people as they're reading through. So we decided to divide it in sort of two books, one fundamental and one the quote unquote advance, so to speak. But so the Warrior in the Garden was supposed to come out first, and now, because the other one's in editing, we're going to go with, of course, the fundamental one first, and then we're going to wait a couple months before the other one comes out. But it is written. Yes, we're still, adding and removing and doing little things like this, which is constant when you're writing a book, as I'm being told. And we started our own little publishing house because we want to take on some projects from people that generally wouldn't be necessarily welcome in publishing house. Like, there's a lot of risk aversion in publishing houses, and we want to make sure that we have a platform to help people that want to come out with something different, to have somebody have a critical eye at it that maybe isn't nearly as risk adverse and potentially capable of facilitating that. So that is kind of what's in the work right now for those two things. And I suspect the high fidelity mine, I can't see it be more than, it'll probably be off editing in the next maybe month. So I can't see it being more than, say, 2 or 3 months, maybe, unless we really hit a snag.
Yeah.
But
Cool.
yeah, I think it will be extremely valuable.
Yeah. Well, looking forward to it.
Yeah, very much so.
Chris, unless you have any last questions, I appreciate your time, and yeah, looking forward to hearing about your next adventures, and looking forward to reading the book.
Yeah, thanks,
Awesome.
Seb.
Thanks
Somebody
again.
That was a pleasure, guys. What happened there?
I don't know.